Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the 11th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble channel series. I'm the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. It's good to be back with every one of you today. I have a very special guest from across the pond, as it were, a wonderful man, Dr. Vyacheslav Simic, or Sima. Mr. Sima here, we're going to go over a number of different things. Mr. Sima and I are going to go over a number of different things, but I want to go ahead and highlight a little bit of a background here. The inspiration for the discussion today, I think, is about empowering we the people everywhere and sort of discussing how that reclamation of action, how that reclamation of purpose, of focus, of mission is so very, very important and paramount in this process. And Mr. Sima has an excellent background to, I think, speak to a lot of sort of moving through the fray, moving through the travesties of different things that have occurred in the world, certainly in the process of people's awakening experience, much of the world just over the last 3 to 5 years. Many other people out there, of course, having multiple decades of being awake to the things that have been going on around the planet. But Mr. Sima brings to the table a background as an analyst and a contractor for the Bosnia-Herzegovina EU Stabilization Association team. He formerly served as a special advisor to the ambassador of Bosnia-Herzegovina to the United States. He currently teaches at the Monterrey Institute of Technology and Higher Education in Mexico City, and he spends a lot of his time working on patriotic missions back in his homeland and a nation that's very near and dear to him. And it is worth noting, for the discussions that we have, Patriots, that as we look at the lens of what's happening around the world, we can clearly see that there is some sort of all hands on deck, everyone needing to come to the table and drink from the common proverbial watering hole, if you will, for everyone of every nation, all of we the people, patriots out there, to get on board and to sort of move things. And there's a lot of historical significance to much of that. Our first 2 world wars, of course, were spawned off in that area of the world by false flag Kabbalist attacks against rightful we the people ruling classes, and that's really what it boils down to. And we look at how the world power dynamics have been destabilized, shifted, reoriented for the gain of the hegemony at the very top, while we the people in all nations everywhere have suffered immensely in more than 120 conflicts since the conclusion of World War II. And so, Mr. Sima, I really appreciate you coming out and spending some time with us today. Thank you very much for being here.
It is an honor and so far a pleasure, and I think it will end the same way.
Well, that is absolutely wonderful. So, before we get into our discussion today, I'd like to talk about your personal perspective. I'd like to talk about your understanding of geopolitics over the last 20 to 25 years, the sorts of things you've seen, sort of defining the problem, identifying the scope and the issues that we face. And then we're going to move our discussion shortly after that into what can we do with our definitions and a newfound awareness of the world power play dynamic. So I'm going to sit back, and if prompts are necessary, I'll step in, but I'm just going to let you take it away if that's all right.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, and greetings to everyone from Serbia, which is my native country. And I also have to say I'm a US citizen and I live in Mexico. It's been about 13 years now. I left the US and Washington, D.C. in 2010, finally, because I felt that life is kind of coming to an end, and it's going to go down after that. And I have been proven right, I think. For Serbia, this is the year 7531 as we count the time, the Serbs, even older than the Jews. Our calendar, this is a calendar we have been using for thousands of years, obviously, in all of our scriptures and the records. We've been using this until basically the communists took over and destroyed our history, our past. And as I like to say, we are born as geopolitical analysts. All you can hear in Serbia all the time is talks about politics in every kind of situation. Anybody, women, men, older, younger, any social class, any kind of work background, education background, we all have opinions, and more or less all inquiries show that about 95 to 99% of the Serbs, we have about 20% minority population of different kinds, but those who are Serbs, it shows that 95, 99% of the people who are Serbian think and see the world in the same way. So we are a very unified nation. It's just that we, like people in America and many other places, we have been taken over and we have been ruled by different powers, different people who are actually disregarding anything we want and the way we see the world, imposing things on us. So we all have to act together, preferably, or individually as nations, to change the situation. So being Serbian, it has been obvious to me since my earliest age that you cannot trust the government. My grandparents, as the moment I actually started comprehending what they're saying, like as you grow up and start speaking and understanding the language around you, you learn that whatever they say is just the opposite. And then as you grow up, you actually have experience, not just authority of your grandparents or your parents telling you these things. You see it in daily life. And I think it has come to most Americans, finally, that comprehension that we are being lied to. And that was the biggest shock when I went to the United States, when I immigrated. Because of political persecution here, I had problems. I was arrested, taken to secret police every morning at 5 and all of that. But finally, I ended up in the United States. And then I was shocked to see how Americans just believed everything. Whatever they tell them, it's just like, oh, okay, And it was really scary because I said, these people can be taken over like idiots. It's incredible. It was being very naive, very good-hearted, hardworking, having no time to experience these things like we have. And it's a fortunate thing that you didn't have all the wars, exterminations, genocides, and everything else that happened to us. And in the end, you are accused of that. This is what happened to the Serbs. Everything that was done to us, all the sufferings we suffered, were actually turned around, and we were turned into murderers and criminals and genocidal maniacs and everything else. And now this is happening to the United States. And in this case, the government of the United States is turning American people, American culture, American heritage into something bad, nasty, evil, while they are actually doing these things. They are the evil ones, and they are making many, many Americans, ordinary people, good people who want to do good, under this pressure by propaganda, they started believing that America is evil. Well, there were many things that the American government did, but in general, America is something that Serbians in a very high percentage still see as something good. Lots of Serbs live there. Lots of Serbs still immigrate to America because we believe in basically the same thing. The American values were actually Serbian values before America even came into being. This is in our heritage. All of our constitutions from the so-called Middle Ages, which we call Golden Ages, Golden Age of Serbia. We had a constitution, a royal constitution in 1219, for example, only 4 years after the Magna Carta Libertatum in England, which is one parchment page giving rights only to adult males of a certain class of the high nobility. About 100 people in all of the Kingdom of England got these rights. No women, not even their wives or daughters, only men. While in Serbia, we published in 1219 a royal constitution of over 2,000 pages, like the discussing and regulating every aspect of the life of the Serbian kingdom, and giving guarantees for many, many freedoms. And then we had an imperial constitution in the middle of the 14th century, in 1345, I think it was. Don't quote me on that. It's been a long time since I talked about this. But that imperial constitution says clearly that even if the emperor is suing somebody or says something that's unconstitutional and against the law, he is not to be obeyed and nobody can be punished. Okay, we can imagine that some peasant who says that it's not constitutional might be killed, but it really didn't happen. So we had these things, these values, family values, all of these things that they are calling American values, Western values, European values. And it shocks us when somebody comes and says this, when we have records, documents, constitutions, legal documents, and everything. Our constitution, after we liberated ourselves from the caliphate in early 19th century, we were the first ones to abolish slavery. And it declared in the constitution, any slave who sets his foot on the soil of Serbia is automatically free. It lasted only about 40 days, I think, because all the courts of Europe, all the liberal nations, France, England, Germany, well, all the principalities, Austro-Hungary, everybody jumped on our back and said, you have to change this. So we were forced by Western powers to actually change the most liberal, the most advanced constitution immediately after we liberated ourselves from the caliphate slavery, where we were slaves. And this is what shocks my students, for example, when I teach them in Mexico, because they are susceptible to this ideology in America that all whites are slave owners and imperialists and everything. And in our case, it was just the opposite. Somebody like me with blue eyes, white skin, light hair was automatically seen as a slave because we were the slaves of the caliphate of the Muslims, while somebody from Africa who was a Muslim would be a master. And they had, according to the Sharia law, the right to sleep in and use anything in the house of a Christian, of a Serb in the Balkans for 3 nights, including, wives, children, male, female, boys and girls, to eat everything. They had to leave the 4th night. They couldn't be there, but still another one comes in. So we are the nation that eats pork, for example, mostly because that was the only thing they didn't eat. So we raised pork. Many dishes are pork and stuff like that. So we have all of this baggage, let's say, cultural, historical, legal, and everything. And then somebody comes from America that popped up when we were already consolidated as a nation centuries before that, and says, oh, these are American values, you have to live like us. And we had all of that before. Centuries, thousands of years. As I said, this is 7,531st year since the beginning of time for us. And we are shocked. Somebody comes from DC and is just behaving like the current ambassador to Serbia, who is, like he thinks he's the king. Everybody has to come publicly, and they record this and play it on TV on all the channels in Serbia, how all of our politicians and people from the government are bowing to him, and he stands there and receives them in the park of the embassy, and they have to kiss, well, not literally, but that's seen as kissing his foot. He's the Pope, he decides what happens and who advances, who enters the parliament, which is completely useless and everything. And this is something that you have to realize, this is coming to you. This is coming to America. It already has. Look at all the last 3 years where it came into being publicly, and nobody wants something, but they impose it on you. They don't care what the law says. Look at the current situation with the political persecutions in the United States, and they are, telling us that they are the leaders of the free world and all of that, So, and then you can see how one country, Russia in this case, says no, enough of this. And now we see all of Africa, or most of Africa, especially in Niger, I think it's in English. I don't want to mispronounce that because it's a big problem for the English-speaking people. But they said no to France. And you see that they're ready to go and murder everybody there because you disobey. And this was our history, our problem at the end of the so-called Cold War, was that we were the only ones who said, no, we will not obey you. We have our own nation, we have our own state, we have our own laws, we have our own will, and we will not obey you. This is why the whole power, at that time NATO had only 19 countries, all of them bombed us I was here, I came back. It was awful, day and night, constant bombing, destroying. I remember just before I came back, the war started, which was not declared. It was illegal, criminal complete destruction of the country. And I lived on Capitol Hill, and I was coming down the steps of the house where I lived, and there was a New York Times box where I used to buy it before the internet. And in the mirror, in the window there, the front page of the New York Times showed my hometown was bombed and destroyed the night before. Of course, it was a lie. There was another time when I realized they're lying. They don't care. They just put whatever they want on the cover page, on the front page of any newspaper, on TV or whatever. I called my mom. She answered. I said, "Were you wiped out last night?" "No, there was no bombing here." But they put my small hometown, as in Mexico, they would say El Pueblito, and it was declared wiped out because they said it was a major military factory that supplied the evil forces of Serbia and everything else. So when you see this, even Russia didn't at that time complain or say anything. They were obeying everything. I remember witnessing, because I worked in that area in the Security Council in the UN, where a British third level bureaucrat of the British mission to the United Nations was yelling at the Russian and the Ukrainian ambassador at that time. This was 1990, I don't know, 3, 2, 4, 5, early first half of the 90s, and calling them names, MF and, BS and all of that stuff. And they were just sitting there like being humiliated publicly in front of the whole world, and not complaining, not saying anything, just accepting it, because for them it was worth going through this, because they were in New York and not in Moscow, because Moscow was horrible in those days. I worked in Moscow in a humanitarian position, humanitarian aid agency, and it was awful. There was nothing. Later I worked in Georgia, in Tbilisi. It was horrible. There was no food, no electricity, no running water, nothing. It was just, so obviously for them it was, you sell your soul to be in New York and get a nice salary, as a UN diplomat, and accept humiliation and everything. But you could see when Putin came in, whatever you think of him, as whatever you might think of Trump, these people made history, started making changes. And you can see the collective West, the political West, whatever you want to call it, the powers that be in the NATO countries, all of them ganged up against Russia, and they cannot do anything. They couldn't do anything to us. We were a small country. We are like, all of Yugoslavia was more or less the size of Wyoming, I think. Yeah. And Serbia was the biggest, but let's imagine even half of Wyoming. 19 most powerful countries would bomb us, destroy, but they didn't dare come down, because they knew that they would be fighting even worse than there is in Ukraine or anywhere else. They didn't dare come down. They worked with the traitors in our nation to force surrender and acceptance of a ceasefire, so that they could come and take over the most valuable piece of land, which is Kosovo and Metohija. And then they just ripped it apart and divided it as preda militaris, as the Latin term is, the gains of war, among themselves. The late Madeleine Albright took over the cell phones. Now one of her daughters is in charge of it. They took the mines, which are the most valuable. Serbia was the source of gold and silver for Europe before Mexico and Peru were discovered. And when the gold was cut off, or the access to gold from Africa was cut off, when the Muslims became very harsh to the Europeans, Serbia exported silk, gold, and silver. These were the main products of Serbia. Serbia was the richest kingdom and empire at that time. And this is why the Muslims came directly. They jumped over Romania, today's Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, whatever, and came to Serbia because they wanted the mines to finance. So the places like Kosovo, there was a city that was bigger than London. Then we had more than 10 cities in Serbia that were as big as London or Paris in those days, and one that was over 50,000 people, which was amazing at the time. And it was in Kosovo. And then the famous city of Srebrenica, which is in Bosnia now, where they say Serbs committed a genocide. and it's illegal even to talk about it in Serbia, because they have passed a law where you cannot question it, you cannot discuss it, even academically, scholarly, investigate it. They have decreed that this is the truth, and you just have to accept it. Even if you question, if you discuss it, you can get in trouble. And this was the place where 3 genocides of the Serbs happened by the Muslims, the Caliphate forces when they conquered it, because it was a source of silver. Srebro means silver, and Srebrenica is the place of silver, or Silver Town, and Silverville, whatever. And then in World War II, the Croat Catholics and the Muslims of Bosnia exterminated all the Jews and all the Serbs and all the mixed marriage kids in 1942. And then in the 1990s, the Muslims and the Croats again exterminated all the Serbs in the vicinity, in the villages around. Over 40 villages were wiped out, and Serbs were accused of committing a genocide there. And this is a cult now. Every July, a month ago approximately, they go, all the Western leaders come. Nobody comes to those villages where Serbian kids were flayed alive, where they were burned alive, where people were just, there was a horrible genocide, thousands of Serbian civilians. They go to a cemetery where militant Muslim jihadists were buried because they actually were operating from a UN demilitarized zone controlled and protected by the Dutch forces, who actually allowed them to go out, kill Serbs, come back, and then they would tell the Serbs, no, you cannot come in because this is a demilitarized zone. And it was the most corrupt area with prostitution and drugs and everything. The most violent and vicious jihadists from all over the world came there to practice, to prepare themselves for future wars in the West, and to get some experience exterminating Christians and non-Muslims. So the whole
Incredible.
thing is just amazing. So anyway, I talked too long. So
Incredible.
I hope you get the background where I come from.
Well, I enjoyed that, and I'll tell you why. When we're talking about what these idiots at the very top of the chains of power and control here in the world have done over the last 1,000+ years. I mean, we could really trace this back to even the times of Christ and before that, but for purposes of our discussion, from the 10th century forward, we are looking at an unbelievable amount of manipulation of history and birthright. It's no wonder when you consider some of the facts that you just highlighted about the Serbian nation, the Serbian ethos, the Serbian people, the Serbian consciousness, the historic sort of, I mean, I guess we could use the term even defiance in some way of this greater global power structure, this greater hegemony that has sought to have total domination since the very beginning of time. In an ethos of independence and sovereignty that runs that deep into the blood and transcends multiple centuries. I think that's something that the American population is really just now starting to learn and appreciate as we, the people over here, our civilization, right? We're relatively young, about 247, 8 years, I think at this point. Might be a little bit off on that. It's around that number. But when we consider that, excuse me, there are other societies that reflect the types of things that we've always reflected, that have the same sort of pride of independence and pride of sort of moral fortitude and focus on what we believe to be right and wrong, and this idea of forgiveness, and that mercy is important, and that accountability in the levers of power is critical and crucial to the furtherance of that civilization, right? When we look at that, and we consider where this has really come from, it makes complete sense as we go throughout history. And what you just concluded a moment ago, discussing the UN, air quotes, peacekeeping mission in that area of the world. We know the UN has never been about peace. There's been more than 140 conflicts on the UN's watch, primarily because the UN is the public-facing arm, if you will, of the one world globalist government controlled by the CIA and the various deep military intelligence communities. And it is interesting, I think, that we should highlight that is the enemy that, for lack of a better term, the Serbian people have very much stuck their thumb in the eye of. And I personally think that that's admirable in many respects, when you can demonstrate a generational ethos of independence and virtue and wanting to do the right thing by the rest of the world, and being a very blessed and natural resource rich area of the world on top of that, right? The individuals at the tops of power and control in society all throughout the history books, and the ones who sort of serve this dark occult religion at the very top that is so sick and twisted, um, they've always pilfered and pillaged everything, right? It's always been sort of, if you've
Exactly.
ever seen some of the Tolkien movies, the dragons that just hoard things endlessly in perpetuity to the end of time, simply because they wish to have it for themselves, regardless of how much that really is, right? And also regardless and irrespective of the suffering that is caused around the rest of the world in a very real present time. And that's one of the things I think that is so powerful about the idea of this great awakening that we're all experiencing. Stories like this are finally getting airtime. People are starting to really appreciate that the suffering that has been described in the warped history books of the days of old is still very present and very real, because the same deep state, the same apparatus, the same elected class of corrupticians at the very top of society have just recycled themselves and rebranded themselves throughout the decades to serve their own purposes and their own needs. There's never really been a true change and a true transfer of power back to we the people, save for maybe 2 or 3 times over the last 500 years. And so, progressing forward, I guess where I'm going with this is, we had discussed off air that one of the major things we had to focus on as we the people around the entire world is understanding our own capability and our own legal systems, our own systems of control that we have governing us at the community levels. You described that just and touched on that just a moment ago, with issues that in Serbia are outlawed for discussion, right? And that makes these things extremely difficult to do. But there are, I think, certain avenues. There are always certain options, I think, that are available to the human being. We are the most clever species. We are the apex of God's creation. We are endowed with
Exactly.
the ability to reason out original ideas that none of these fools and deep state cockroaches at the very top have ever considered, or that they were ever prepared for. As a matter of fact, some of my own content is based on the idea that the 2016 election loss of Hillary Clinton in the United States was sort of a move that this power structure at the top of society never accounted for and never truly saw coming.
No, they were shocked.
So as we look at where we go from here, and we reorient the discussion to we the people, because it's got to be about the people, right? At the end of the day, it's got to be about stepping back into our own power. As an academic, as someone who spent time in DC, as someone who has witnessed the good and the bad and the extremely ugly, about some of the realities that we the people, we really need to face, come to terms with together, and come around come to the watering hole, the table as it were, and have a good, honest, frank discussion. What does that look like, and what are some of the options that are available to we the people, both in Serbia and elsewhere around the world at large?
Thank you. That's a very good question, because that was something that I wanted to actually express, but I didn't know how to lead into that. The main thing is never to give up, to be sure of yourself. This is something that helped me, being Serbian, with the knowledge of my history, my family and my nation's history, to come into a room full of these big shots and to feel not only equal to them, but superior to them, even though they are the ones with the titles, with the power and everything, because my title is a truth speaker. My title is a fighter for freedom. So they cannot, unless they kill me, but they cannot stop me. And many times I stop them, dead in their speeches, because I would just say, no, that is not true. And they stop. That is the power that we all have, because you cannot sit still. You cannot be quiet. You have to stop them right there, then and there. At the highest level, who cares? They cannot do anything, because the law is clear. In many cases, I had interpreters stopped because they lie. Serbs are saying one thing, the interpreter is saying just the opposite. I stopped it immediately. I get up in front of all of these big shots. Many people understood. Madeleine Albright, for example, she spoke Serbian perfectly, because she actually very close to my mom's hometown, my hometown here in Serbia, in the middle of Serbia. She hid as a child because Serbs accepted her father and her family, gave them false papers that they were Christians, even though they were Jews, and kept them alive. And then she led the war. It was, you can look it up on Time magazine. On the front page, it says Madeline's War. She bombed Serbia for God knows what. That's for psychiatrists to actually study that and everything. I think I figured it out because she had a big problem with her father, who was a very honest, a decent man, who saw in her the evil she had in her soul. So she hated everything that her father loved, and he loved Serbia and Serbs. He was very grateful. So she, at the same time, you have to, I just want to show you about Srebrenica. I wrote 2 books, not only me, but some other people, but these are thick, big books full of evidence, academically solid, not possible to deny these things, not possible to destroy any of this, because they present facts. But then again, at one conference in DC, for example, when former Prime Minister, President of Kosovo, the war criminal, the pedophile, the trafficker in children, Hashim Tachi, who is now glorified in the West, was with Obama, with George Bush, with Clinton and Hillary and Bill and everybody. I stopped him and I said, you know, I have the facts. What happened here, where we knew that where he killed people himself. And you know, this was at the US Institute for Peace, with all of the diplomatic corps present, ambassadors and US officials glorifying him, applauding to him. He was just BSing everybody. And I stood up there, and there was a Serbian consul at that time. He was from Kosovo, and the miserable wretch that he kept quiet. I stood up and said, not to try to make myself a hero, but I just want to say how the power of truth can destroy the whole thing right there in 1 second. And you know what he said? He says, I am a politician. I don't care about the facts, the names, or the dates. And then everybody went silent, and then everybody left, because he exposed himself, exposed them. You know, so it was just like incredible, because you show them and they cannot, they just freak out. They have a short circuit in their brain. I can give you many examples like that from DC and many other cases, because they would just, you know, in the New York Times, I remember this guy, Friedman or whatever his name was, he wrote about Bosnia for a decade. He didn't even know that Bosnia was not Serbia. He thought that Bosnia was Serbia and that Serbia was Bosnia. That was the same thing. Many people, these high officials, they would have no idea where the Balkans was, you know, the whole area. And they were chairman of a subcommittee dedicated to this and that, you know, like they had no clue, but they decide the fate of nations and of innocent children and everybody else. I remember at CNN, there one Serbian journalist from an ancient city or our ancient capital, which was the biggest fortress in European history, it still stands there. He was asking him, how can you, when you shave your face in the morning before you go to work, how can you look into your eyes working for CNN? And this guy completely missed the point, but everybody else understood, because he was one of the big shots there. Mann, I think, was Thomas Mann or something like that, very famous. He thought it was like glorifying him. So he said, and openly in front of everybody said, I think of myself as God. I shave and I look into my eyes and I say, wow, man, the fate, the destiny of nations is in your hands today. The way you present to the world, American, you know, population who is not very educated, who does, you know, they don't know geography, they don't know history, they just believe whatever they say. They're going to support us. Remember that we call her the witch, Christiana Amanpour, when she was the famous one who asked Bill Clinton, is it tidy whities or whatever the other kind of underwear is, the famous question. And she became a famous journalist because of that. And then she was also presenting, you know, staging these things where they blew up people live on TV just for to support the argument. But in many cases, they blew up Serbian children, for example, and then named them Muslim. And you could see the graves have crosses, and it's in Cyrillic, and they say Serbs killed Muslim children at the cemetery. So all of these things, but truth and bravery, you have to stand up, because your life is not worth anything if you're living it as a slave on your knees. This is in our ethics, and all, we have wonderful epic poetry. I could give you a book here that a friend of mine translated into beautiful English, where it says the mother of a prince is telling him, when his father is asking who shall be the king, because our emperor died and then these nobles were fighting for the title, and his mother says, my son, always remember God. Don't give it to your father nor to your uncles, but according to the truth, to God's truth. And he did. He actually obeyed her and did it, and ignored his father and his uncles, his own family. He would have been the prince, the imperial prince. He said, no, the crown belongs to this little boy whose father died, and I will support him. And this is our example. Every mother teaches her son and her daughter here in Serbia that way. It's not possible to, and this is the point, we accept it because they're more powerful right now to impose these things. But we do not stop talking about this so-called massacre and genocide. I wrote 2 books, and other people with me, but we talk daily about it to transmit to the next generation the truth, because they will believe after a while. So if you give up, if you become so busy just about money, the truth of the founding fathers of the United States, who are very respected by every educated Serb, because these are the same values. These are the Serbian values, even though you call them American, but these are the same, about truth, liberty, all of that stuff, equal opportunity and everything. We admire that. If you run only after the dollar or positions or whatever, cars, whatever it is, sex, drugs, rock and roll, you forget what you were taught, and you forget to teach your kids about these things. After 3 generations, everything is just for money. And this is where America failed, because the success killed it.
You know, that's actually a very, I think, adept and astute analogy. The pursuit of material world items, be they a need, be they a want, still requiring the same attention, the same energy, the same movement, that busyness, the routine that gets installed, especially in the Western world nations, coupled with the influence of economic manipulation and how those things have occurred, right, and been used and weaponized against the rest of the world, and are now, I think, for the first time being shown out as weapons against even the peoples of the United States, even against the peoples of the United Kingdom and others. When we consider everything that is occurring, and we consider that our focus has to come back to what truth is powerful, truth is respected, truth is revered. I think we, the people out there, can find significant truth in the divine, in the creator, in God, in our purpose here in the world, right? There is a purpose to existence itself. There is a purpose and a reason for all of us being here. For example, at this time in history, where these sorts of awakenings are sort of taking the world by storm, because an information matrix has been created, whereupon we can have a broadcast like this, publish it to the website or some sort of online hosting platform, and hundreds of thousands of people will see it inside of just a few days. And so there has to be, I think, a greater cosmic design that has to be factored in when we talk about, because what you described just a moment ago essentially amounts to being actively involved in the writing of our history as history is occurring. If you happen to have the exposure or the experience or the circumstance arise where you out there as the audience, as an audience member, have an opportunity to leverage influence or share a very important truthful reality, or highlight an extremely important statistic, or illuminate the fact that there is a vast discrepancy in certain things reported by the media or government or finance or history or academia or law schools or universities or what have you, right? All of these areas of capture that have happened in the world. If you are in a position to exercise some sort of directionality influence on those things, I believe those are ordered moments. I believe that those are moments that are divined by God himself to give us the connectivity and the sort of interdependency, if you will, on one another as his creation to bring the world to a higher place, a place that, Mr. Sima, you described just a moment ago as sort of having been explored in several different forms, even as early as the 13th century in the Serbian Kosovo area and in the Balkans and in that area of the world, right? And we know that there's a deep, rich history of many nations out there, especially in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, and into the northern areas of the Arabic Crest. There's a very deep, vast, rich history that has been concealed, obfuscated,
Exactly.
burned,
Yeah.
looted, destroyed, to sort of meet the ends of the various conquerors through the ages, right? And many of them serve sort of the same purposes, and oftentimes even doing business at that international level with the same sorts of individuals, right? Because if we know one thing, history repeats, and
We know
international
about them.
relations in many regards is just something that's now being shown out to the world truly for what it has always been. But now we have an ability to define for ourselves, I think, in many respects, what the actual occurrences are versus what we, the people, want them to be. And I'm really inspired by that message where you're talking about, being actively involved, getting sort of off the bum, if we will, and moving into some sort of action. Doesn't have to be graceful. It doesn't have to be excellent at first, right? There can't be a sort of an over pressure for expectation, but I think the movement itself, the getting involved itself, the following whatever passion speaks to you, like what keeps you up at night, what is driving your cork, what an issue around this awakening process that you just can't put down. You sink your teeth into it more and more. You don't even mean to, then you get more involved in it. Those are the things that I think are stirring everyone, and they're moving different factions of we the people everywhere in all nations to do something. We have tactical civics groups, for example, that are gathering here in the United States because there are portions and components of our constitutional process available all of the way down to our municipality and our locality level that we the people, because we have not been educated in civics for the better part of a half century in our neck of the woods here in this area of the world, we're simply unaware that these sorts of levers and options are available to us, right? It's akin to playing a game of chess having half of the pieces missing. So when we look at the actual understanding and the actual background of what is available, right, and then we spread that organically through broadcasts like this and others, it spawns off, I think, these moments in other municipalities and localities where they say, oh my, we have something similar, maybe perhaps not the same, but similar, available to us in our neck of the woods. We just have to do a little bit of digging, right? A little bit of research. They've never taught us anything that was truly important. I think if any thinking adult out there over the age of 55 has figured out that most everything in life that comes with any amount of true wisdom, true learning, true long-term significance comes post-secondary school, if we could call it that. So I guess that's a really good place to start closing it up, is this idea that we're coming into an era in time where we, the people, have to go and re-educate ourselves. And that's sort of poetic, I think, considering that you are by trade an academic, an educator, an instructor of new minds. You have a part to play, I think, that is very important and powerful and impactful, because that impressionability of the late teen, early 20s age student, or the mid 20s age student, for example, coupled with the fervor and the vitality and the passion and the vigor of those younger generations, and the fire that's in their eyes, and the absolute just maelstrom of energy that sort of comes behind them when they put their minds to things. I think poetically we should talk about, how do we instruct future generations in the ways that they should go, because that's really what the good book teaches us. We need to teach them in the ways that they should go.
Exactly. If I may add one thing, because truth is the most important thing, and being brave to say it, to act in a truthful way, to actually pronounce these things, because we know that words are powerful. We know from all the holy scriptures that it was the words, the language, the thought expressed physically as sound, as vibrations, came out of somebody's mouth and then rearranged the world. And we have that power. But we must tell, just like at court, when you swear the oath that you will tell the truth, what is it? Only truth and nothing but the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. That is important, because if you only tell a part of the truth, that is also lying. So that is how we have to educate, not to pick and choose. Even if it serves us, we have lots of things. This was the difference between us Serbs and all the other people around here, Croats, Muslims, whatever, like the whole bunch that America created here, new nations that never existed. It suddenly popped up, like Bosnians and Macedonians and Montenegrians and Slovenians and Croatians, and it's just like amazing how overnight they can create these things. And their intellectuals, their academicians, their professors, their historians told the truth, only the part that suits them. And we Serbs are not angels. We had murderers, we had war criminals, we had awful people. Everybody does. Look at America. Who committed more war crimes than America? But we have to talk about it, not only choose like, oh, we are perfect, we are angels. And this was the difference between us and them, because we were the only ones. And Russia today, look at Russians. Russians admit all the bad stuff. If you speak Russian, you can see they have big discussions. It's very open. It's like dividing the society. It's exploding inside Russia. All of these discussions about what is going on. We did the same thing. We don't hide it. But if you talk to a Croat or a Muslim from Bosnia or Albanians and all of these others, oh my God, like they will tell you one part of the truth. And this is the point. We have to tell the truth, and the truth is whole, because God is truth and God is whole. You cannot divide it. You cannot choose, oh, I like this part or like that part. That is the point. If you want to educate somebody, you have to give them the whole truth and nothing else but the truth. Not to incorporate, mix it in with lies, and then it looks like the truth, but it's not. It's more poisonous, it's more dangerous than pure lies.
Well, and it's fascinating you should bring that up, because it is that truth that we impart to those younger generations that will determine the course of where our societies and our civilizations end up. There will come a point for any parent out there, and you know this, that your progeny and your offspring will sort of take the reins over from you, and you will transition into a later stage of your life, a sort of a period of recollection, reconciliation, right? And then we move on to beyond this lifetime, and those formerly what we would call young ones then take the reins as perhaps the middle or pre-elderly ones themselves. And this process continues through the generations, right? Whatever I instruct in my child and the way that he should go will reflect in large part, perhaps with some minute differences, the way that he will teach his progeny to go. And then that will go through the generations, right? And the oral tradition is a very important component of that. And actually, that's something I'd like to spend just a moment on, and then we'll close our call off, is the importance of the oral tradition. The written history in many respects helps to inform the whole. But when we consider that it is the victor who writes that history, then we have to also acknowledge that those parties that were self-interested throughout the annals of history, regardless of how connected or not they were to this deep state that has always influenced things in the background, by virtue of that self-interest and whatever extent of those connections may have been, we know that there are written records and different histories that have been purposefully obfuscated, purposefully removed, purposefully omitted, right? There are even records to show as recently as World War II that some of the American generals, for example, that went down in history as war heroes and sort of benevolent liberators, were not actually very tolerant themselves, and in many cases, war crimes were committed underneath their commands. And so we could philosophically debate where those orders came from, what prompted that, what dynamics of power and play and manipulation were going on in the world, or we could simply accept the fact that in many respects, we have to preserve the oral tradition because the history up to and including things that are very feel good and very significant, and I think culturally heavy on the consciousness of different civilizations throughout our history, we've all been affected by it. The oral tradition has always been the basis, I think, for the most accurate and the godliest records coming from all different schools of thought throughout history, right? When we look at the Torah, for example, recorded from the Abrahamic oral tradition, when we look at other very, very old spiritual texts, such as the Mahabharata or some of the Dalai Lama lamasery texts, we look at the reference of the oral tradition that informed those texts. Many times that tradition was thousands of years old before that. The same is true of Egypt and the hieroglyphics. And so I think our purpose for being here at this time in this place where the oral tradition, the power of word, the power of sound, the power of conveying the same message around the world and resonating with one another and having the great debate, not only in our counties and communities and pubs and restaurants, but in the digital online worldwide space where we can have many different pen pals from many different continents across many different time zones. And we have the same discussions and the same debates and the same rigorous examination of the absolute laundry list of criminality that has been heaped onto mankind in the last 500 to 1,000 years. And we're realizing that at the end of the day, it's always been about keeping the world from being in balance with this thing that we call life, which is exactly what God has always wanted for us. And I think it is our mission here in this world to pioneer a new way of living, to pioneer a new era, to blaze a trail that we can teach our young ones in brutal and honest truth. And it does have to be very frank and honest and not watered down, I think, in many respects, with of course care being given to their receptivity based on their development. But of course, by the time that they're an adult, we want a fully understood, very broad foundation for truth that they can then take forward into life and experience whatever truths life's journey has for them in particular. Mr. Sima, closing thoughts, my friend.
Well, I have to say that I wish you would come to Serbia, spend time here in the unofficial life of Serbia and society, not with anything controlled by the US and the American ambassador in the West. And you would see it being practiced, all of this that you just mentioned, the brutal truth. Many of my friends in America and all over the world say, don't you Serbs have the words please and thank you? And we say, yeah, we do, but they are reserved for God usually. You, with other people, you're just direct and you tell them, you don't have to be this like, oh, would you please kindly, whatever, and then thank you, whatever. No, this is understood here in the tone of your language, in the manner, but they will tell you brutally, very directly, the truth. And we face it in our families. We don't have this American thing like, oh, my little child, this is when the discrepancy becomes, this is what America has become, that people who are older than me a little bit cannot recognize their children or grandchildren, especially because there was a disruption in this. Nobody transmitted anything, and they were to the younger people, and they were taking over their brains with this wokeness and everything else. And there is a completely new society, and it's crazy. It's all falling apart. You need brutal, direct truth and direct relationship with other people to bring us down to this very human, essential, to the bone, to the essence of our, to the marrow of our bones, understanding of what human condition is, so that we can understand that only starting from there we can rise up to the level of becoming godlike, which is the mission, which is the purpose, which is the goal of our life here in the world. Only that way. Everything else is what they call Maya in Buddhism, which is the same in Serbian. All the terms, everything in the Vedas, in Buddhism and Hinduism, because Serbian is equal to Sanskrit, the mother language of the white people of Europe. All the terms are so. We don't need, for example, another little thing about Serbia, that when you learn Buddhism or Hinduism, it takes us 15 minutes because the same words. We don't need 50 pages to explain to us what is yama or some other concepts. Nothing comes to mind right now. But you need this to know that this Maya, this veil of lies is around you. You just cut through it and you go free. It is brutal, it's hard, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger and makes you more godlike.
And that truly is the mission, right? Refinement, purification by fire, coming to this world to, glorify God and sort of rejoice and juvenate in a jubilant, I think, co-creative existence with the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and getting to experience the fullness of who we really are, right? And that's the mission of the end of the day. And it's worth highlighting as we close out, if you're one of the audience members out there, that this is the reason, this is the basis, this is the foundation of why the Luciferian Kabbalah structure at the very top of society in the background, in the shadow governmental levers of power, has always hated the human being. We represent the image and likeness of the creator of all things, the Almighty of all things, and we represent a compassionate, kind, firm, indignant, righteous, and fair and just God. And that is something that is antithetical, I think, in many respects to everything about the system that this structure, this power apparatus that has existed in the world for so many centuries. It's antithetical to everything about the system they've built. And it is because of that, it is because we have these conversations like this. It is because we are learning who we are again. We're getting back in touch again with who we are. We're feeling the power of our inspired connection. We're moving into action, and we have to continue to keep doing so. But it's because of this that this power structure has met its extinction date, and that it will be no more as we move into the future. We are too interlinked. We are too knowledgeable all around the world in every key municipality and area. We've done so, I think, in an incredible coordination of mind and body and soul and spirit that can only be ascribed to the Creator himself. It's a wonderful time to be alive, Mr. Sima. It's been a great time having you here today. I really appreciate this conversation. I'd be happy to eventually come to Serbia anytime, do a little bit of citizen journalism, and try some excellent cuisine. I very much appreciate your time today. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back with you again soon on the Q News Patriot channel. This is SG Anon. Stay safe. Thanks. Bye-bye.